Hello and welcome back to the Ghoul Guide Association, the show where we discuss all things Gothic and pop culture. We are as ever your Ghoul Guides. My name is Lauren.
And I'm Mary.
And today we have a special guest back in the association secret headquarters with us, Dr. Kathleen Hudson. Welcome back to the association.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be back.
We're very glad to have you. As you might have guessed from having Kathleen back in the virtual headquarters, we are going to be talking about 28 years later, the Bone Temple today.
We're in the Bone Temple, guys.
We're in the Bone Temple.
We're in the Bone Temple.
Gone down to Bone Temple Town. You'll all be shocked to know that I've not seen this film, but Mary and Kathleen have, and they're going to give their thoughts on it today. But before we jump in, Dr. Mary Misgoin, do you want to give our listeners a bit of a TLDR on this franchise?
Yeah, so I do want to say, like, the first thing that Kathleen messaged us when she saw it was like, Lauren, you absolutely cannot.
Now, please bear in mind, this does not stop us from making rude jokes about the Bone Temple. But
Yeah,
no, we all kind of agreed Lauren could not watch this one.
And I have tried really hard not to spoil anything to you or even tell you, like, just the gist of my thoughts. But it's like, yeah, absolutely, Lauren, this is not a film for you. So I guess firstly, maybe there should be some content warnings. Like the other films in the franchise, which, you know, if you haven't, here is your reminder to go and watch our part 1 and part 2, where we talk about 28 days later, 28 weeks later, and 28 years later, which came out last year. If you have like all of those, this film has zombies, quite aggressive zombies that do eat people, and they're quite violent. But, and I think, Kathleen, you'll probably agree with me, this film seems like a massive step up in terms of the like physical violence and also like sadism or just the intensity of it. So an extra kind of content warning there, that if that is not your thing, then just be careful as we go through this review, and also maybe, like Lauren, maybe skip the film.
Yeah.
Yes.
The impression I got, because I did see a couple of things online and I thought, oh dear. But the impression I got is that this is going down that dystopia route that Cormac McCarthy's The Road, later seasons of The Walking Dead kind of do, where, okay, we've introduced you to the zombies, we've introduced you to the terrible things that are happening. What about the people and the terrible, terrible things that people can do? And that wasn't absent in the earlier films, but it seems like this one has really doubled down on it, which I do think is interesting, because that's also what the recent Last of Us game did.
So this is essentially the 4th installment in what will hopefully be a 5-part franchise series. So there is
it just got greenlit, right?
One film left to go. So for all the fans of Cillian Murphy, he will be back for that final installment. But this is also the kind of second in this kind of more recent, I don't really want to call it a trilogy, but 3-part connected
trifecta
28 days films. And I think it's really interesting that we have started with this violence, because and let me find where I wrote that down in my notes. So Nia DaCosta, who directed this film, said that the previous film was about the theme of family. This film, The Bone Temple, is about the nature of evil, and then we can come back to what the third film, fifth film will be. But I think that's actually a really nice way into the kind of TLDR. Where are we starting this film at, and what happened in the first 28 years later film, which was about that theme of family. So Kathleen, not to put you on the spot, but just because you did say you thought you could say, like, summarize the film in like 3 sentences, would you like to
summarize the 28 years later?
Yes, 28 years later.
Okay, yes. So 28 years later is, I in the most distilled version, is about the journey of this young man named Spike, his relationship with his parents, his mother who has a terminal illness, his father who is sort of this manifestation of we'll say troubled masculinity. We won't call it violent or problematic. He leaves his maybe cultish kind of home. He he goes on this grief journey with his mother. He meets Dr. Kelson, who is really the pinnacle. I think he is really more the main character in the follow up. Samson, who is an alpha zombie. And we can talk more about. We go into some detail about that in the previous episode, but we can talk about that again. And in the course of leaving his home, he almost permanently, as part of this transition from childhood to adulthood, he runs into what evolves to be a cult led by Sir Jimmy Crystal, played by Jack O'Connell, who is a very thinly disguised Jimmy Saville figure, which again was a major part of the controversy of the last film, that it seemed to, one, have this major tonal shift from this very elegant, stylized, heart-wrenching grief journey and coming-of-age story into this very, very violent kind of poppy, Teletubbies themed.
It's almost like Clockwork Orange vibes, isn't it?
Yes. And I didn't clock in the last one how young the cult members were. So when we start, we basically do almost pick up, like, I think next day from when Spike is cornered and rescued, and I'm using air quotes there, by this cult led by Jimmy Crystal. We established very clearly in 28 years later that this is a religious figure, but is a antichrist religious figure, that he has his origins in religion in the church, based on an opening scene from there. But he wears an inverted cross. Obviously, his initials are very suggestive. So that's where we pick up from that.
Yeah, and just to add, he is a self-appointed knight. He calls himself Sir Jimmy Crystal. So this is 28 years later. He's in his late 30s, early 40s. So when we first see him, which would have been at the same time as the Cillian Murphy 28 Days Later timeline, he was a child. His dad was a preacher, and he survived by hiding in the church. And then we are then introduced to him again at the end of the last film, leading this cult of young people who have no idea who Jimmy Savile is, also don't know about the Teletubbies, apart from what they have learned from Sir Jimmy Crystal. So that is essentially where the Bone Temple picks up with Spike and Sir Jimmy and his cult of
his Jimmies.
very well. Interestingly, yes, they are called Jimmies, and they also he calls them his fingers. So yeah,
which someone pointed out, there are 5 fingers on a hand. He says there are 7. So we have established that he can't count on top of everything else.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's throughout the film. It's very clear that everyone is very traumatized by the experience of the zombie apocalypse. Jimmy hasn't had what Spike had and what Spike's parents had, which is a community. We don't really know how long he's been with this group, but they are quite young, so maybe he's been going around for decades, just traumatizing young people. But essentially, his cult is around, he is the kind of intermediary between an entity that he calls Old Nick. And he says that
we're going full demonic Satanist.
100%. And Old Nick is his father. And he claims that he can hear his father. And his father has said that Sir Jimmy should have 7 fingers, which will make a fist. So he calls all of these children, which dress up like him in the Jimmy Savile like tracksuits and wearing blonde wigs and over the top gold jewelry. They are each called Jimmy, so they lose their identity, but they're also one of his 7 fingers, because 7 is, it's very bizarre. But what I found was really interesting is that you could clearly see how much he was influenced by being the son of a preacher.
Yeah.
But it's almost immediately troubled too, because sort of the arc of this entire character. I mean, he's a very fragile cult leader, and something that kind of came up almost immediately was the imbalance of it. He rarely does anything himself. These kids are so very carefully groomed to violence, and when that's threatened, this character doesn't have a whole lot of authority. Like, they turn on him really quick when they do eventually turn on him. Something I found interesting was that they took the pains to establish in the first 28 Years Later movie, like as the first scene, his father being religious, that, he's in a rectory, he's right next to the church. We as the audience know where he comes from, but he very openly and immediately disavows the father, and then spends the rest of the movie looking for the father, like looking for a replacement father. The old Nick, the Satan father, tries to find it in Kelson, tries to find it in all these other spots. So it was a very interesting extension, I thought, of the first film, in which there's a troubled relationship between Spike, obviously, and his dad. But I appreciate that they didn't go too far into trying to make Jimmy Saville / Crystal into a remotely sympathetic figure. But his pathology is as, complex as it is pathetic, essentially, that because he does not have that, because he has this troubled past with a father figure, he then turns around and constructs the worst found family you've ever seen on film. But yes, it was like with that opening scene where it is, and you also see his process of collecting these children, which is home invasions and then forcing them to fight for inclusion, forcing them to fight each other to the death in order to be one of the 7, which is how Spike is included. He kills another cult member, mostly by accident, it seems like. So he's incorporated, and then when there is a later scene where they where they stage a home invasion, the implication is that if one of those members can kill a current member, they can live and they can be included. So it's a really disturbing. I love how no matter what kind of apocalypse we end up in, we always duplicate the Manson family in some way. But so it was an just from the beginning. I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing to evoke from the first movie and then immediately just subvert.
All right, so we've talked a little bit. Mary, do you want to give just a quick overview of the movie? As ever, because we are kind of deep diving this, there may be some spoilers, but Kathleen and Mary will sort of tag when there's going to be a big one. But this maybe is one where if you don't want to be spoiled, listen to it after you've been to see the film.
Yeah.
Or if you're trying to decide whether or not you want to see it, then,
It's going to be really hard to talk to you without spoiling the film, and also spoiling the good bits of the film, which is basically all of the film, because I haven't said
it's
this to you.
It's a good film.
It's so good. I loved 28 Years Later, the first one. It was on, I said to you, Lauren, it's like one of my top 3 of the films that I watched last year. I think this one is so much better. It's honestly, it's so good, but at the same time, it's so violent.
Yes.
So it will be hard.
It's funny you said.
Yeah.
It's funny you said sadistic, because I was sitting there thinking, oh wow, the first one was very gentle compared to this. I'm being attacked psychically. That's great. Because sadistic was the word that kept occurring to me.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, because I feel like one of the things that zombie, not just zombie movies, but zombie games, zombie literature has really picked back up again in the last couple of years. And I don't want to necessarily say this is definitely to do with current political turmoil, but one of the things that I feel like zombie horror is really picked back up from like the early Gothic is that you can have something so unthinkable and so horrible in terms of like something supernatural or a virus or a zombie, but the true horror is the things that human beings can do to each other.
That is
And the
that is
violence in this one,
100%. That is 100% what this film is about. So if we think about that theme of the nature of evil, I think whilst there are instances of violence with zombies, they are almost like background apart from the alpha, who we will
Yeah.
get to. But yeah, the film opens, as Kathleen said, with this kind of initiation ritual with Spike and the Jimmies, led by Sir Jimmy. It's in what used to be a swimming pool. Sir Jimmy is sat on the side, the other Jimmies and Spike are in the middle, and Spike essentially has to go up against one of the Jimmies, and it's a fight to the death. And as Kathleen said, he accidentally throws a knife and hits him in an artery in his leg, and then this boy like bleeds out, and then he becomes Jimmy, and Sir Jimmy Crystal says, "What's your name?" Spike, "No, what's your name?" Jimmy. And it's like this kind of process of de-identification and like de-individualization, where you just
which is
become part
literally
of
the
this
bite model.
yeah, you become this part of this collective, and then with the gang, with this cult, they then embark on a journey where they invade people's homes where people have been living securely, as you know, as much as they can. And then there's a scene later on where they have it, so you have, I think, two instances in this home invasion of terror, but then also of like horror and gore. So the first time is in the kitchen, where two individuals from this group kind of return home and they find the rest of their group members surrounded by all of these weird people in tracksuits and blonde wigs. And it's very kind of like where you can sense that there's so much tension, but nobody wants to break it. And Sir Jimmy starts telling this story about the Teletubbies, as if it's like a kind of religious parable. And it is so bizarre, but you're also kind of like watching these two people who've just come back being like, what is going on here, and how much can we push this? And when they push it, that's when the kind of violence breaks out. The Jimmies end up rounding all of these people up. They take them into the barn, and then you see the true kind of horror and gore of what this group of children essentially are capable of, because they have been groomed to do this. But I also think what's interesting is that it's very clear that Sir Jimmy has been traumatized by maybe his upbringing, but also by the apocalypse itself. But so have all of these young people. They've become almost desensitized to violence and to inflicting violence. It's just, violence is like another kind of thing that happens in their daily life. So yeah, Kathleen, I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about that barn scene, because it is
yes.
horrific.
Well, I think the other key thing too is in keeping with this understanding of a cult, and the other thing, so I know she said that the theme was about the nature of evil, but I think within that was also a really tight, well-written deconstruction and reevaluation of religion and faith. And it reconceives of faith, religious faith, as action. So, it's not just what you believe, it's how you live those beliefs out. And the violence that occurs is highly ritualized. So they do these things called charity. So tonight we are doing charity. And you never hated that word so much as by the time you get to the end of this film, because what it means and what it actually means are obviously the opposite. The barn scene, so they basically immobilize these people, and Jimmy says, for today, we're going to remove their shirts
So
or
this
remove
is
their pants. And then the result is what I can only describe as someone gets peeled.
yeah. So
Yeah.
this is what I saw and was like, oh, I definitely can't watch this
Mhm.
movie. But I thought that was really interesting because the little clip it showed and the person explaining it, and was like, that's such a childlike thing to do. Like, one, bullies in the playground, that's often one of the things, and I don't know if it's the same in American schools, but certainly in British schools. But also, like the football team thing or the sports team thing, like, you know, you like, are you going to be shirts or skins and things like that? Like, there was something not only absolutely horrific about it, but something so like horrifyingly immature about it, because
Yes.
there's an element of shaming there that
Mhm.
is so like, obviously this was just me seeing someone talk about this scene on TikTok and I was like, oh god. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, god, that's such a classic playground bully thing to do, like make someone take their shirt off or make someone take their trousers off, or like it's humiliation, not just
Yes.
violence.
And it's treated as a child's game for the most part. Like the kids are very excited to do it. Not Spike, but Spike throws up, and we all are
Oh,
kind of in the scene with him, like, oh yeah, please remove us from this situation. And you're right. What struck me is I'm like, this is like a child's understanding of the early Christian martyrs. If you look at some of the
yeah,
very old school early Catholic tortures that saints go through, this is textbook, and it is a
yeah.
very child-like. You're right. It's a very immature humiliation
Mhm.
level thing. I will say this too, and this is me putting on my horror movie nerd thing, because I do watch all kinds of movies, and I do like some of the gory ones. Um, I watched the scene, and I finished the movie, and at the time I was really horrified, obviously, and disgusted, and everything else. But when I got out of the theater, I it occurred to me that I actually saw less than I thought I did. It's a
That's
really
very clever.
Yeah, it's a really brilliantly constructed scene. It almost reminds me a little bit of Audition, to Takashi Miike's classic Audition, where where the ending scene is really violent, but what you don't actually see all that much. You hear things, and you see the end result. You like see the very beginning and the very end, and that was a really, really, like, kudos to the director, because it's a really tough thing to do, to convince the audience that they've seen something that they haven't
Mhm.
seen. And looking back, I'm like, now that I think about it, all the images that I have of that scene are things I projected. It's not actually stuff I saw. It's small glimpses. And don't get me wrong, the stuff that is shown is horrifying. Like, you do see knives, you do see skin, and you see the after effects, which are brilliantly conceived, beautifully done. But that scene felt like a sucker punch. But looking back, it was so cleverly done, because I actually didn't see a whole lot of
Yeah.
violence.
And
I
that
think
kind of
Um,
that's
takes you
yeah.
back to the old school, like,
oh yeah.
don't show too much. Like,
Hmm.
that is quite an artistic
Yes.
I was
way to do it.
I was thinking in both things of what you were saying there about the tagline of the film, which is "Fear is the new faith," and I think that it works
Hmm.
really well in what you're saying about what's shown is that we, the audience, the spectator, we're so afraid of what we're
Yeah.
seeing because it's horrific that we believe it. You know, we suspend our disbelief and
Mhm.
we believe that this person has been skinned alive. We see the end result and we're like, yes, and
Yeah.
our brain almost tricks ourselves into believing that, which I think is a lot of what actually does happen with this cult, in that so much of it is
Yes.
Yes.
predicated on that idea of fear, and his
Yes.
Jimmys have to have faith
Mhm.
in him in order to do what they're doing, and
That's
to
such
commit those acts. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because as you guys know, I listen to a lot of cult podcasts. And one that I recommend recently on the show, Was I in a Cult? They interview and talk to cult survivors. And one of the things that they say constantly is they were so scared that why wouldn't they believe it? Like, why wouldn't they believe that Warren Jeffs can read their mind? Like, why wouldn't they believe that the world was going to end? Like, that they are so afraid because the cult leader has told them, and because there's terrible things happening around them. And when you think about people like David Koresh, Jim Jones, I can't remember his name, but the leader of the Children of God, there are these, there are things going around comets, world wars, nuclear bombs. Like, there are things that are happening that make you believe in what that cult leader is telling you, and that fear is such an important part of the cultic experience. And I think it reminds us that when we look at cult victims and we say like, oh well, how would you fall for that, or how did you get taken in by that, or why would you believe, the JMS, the Korean cult, is a really good example. Why did you get taken in by that? Like, why did you think that you put yourself in that position to experience that sexual violence? And I think one of the big issues that we're having at the moment on multiple fronts is our inability to have empathy for people and understand how things like cults grab a hold of people. And I think it's really fascinating that this is something that Nida Costa has picked up on. And if you think about, like, how old's Jimmy at the beginning? Like 6, 7?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're a 6-year-old boy. Your father is a
probably
fire
a bit
and brimstone preacher.
probably a bit older. Yeah,
Maybe
but, no,
10.
This was the other. This was the other thing that I was going to say about that tagline and what you were saying, Kathleen, about the Sir Jimmy's interpretation being childlike, because I think we know that religious trauma is a thing, and that being surrounded by kind of stories, and I'm thinking specifically about Christian stories, you don't always necessarily need the images and the statues, although if you have seen Christian art, you know that some of it is quite horrifying, and actually in a way not dissimilar from what we see in the film in the barn. But even just the stories themselves, they're quite violent, and the central kind of foundational story is one where an individual, a man, the son of God, if you want to believe that, but he is beaten, injured, wounded in the side, and then crucified, which is one of the most painful ways to be killed. And that is the central tenet of Christianity that Jimmy would have kind of absorbed. And we know that people do have religious trauma where those stories that they learned from a young age do impact them in their adult lives,
especially the apocalyptic nature. I think it's not a surprise that so many of the very violent cult leaders of the 70s and the 80s started out as Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, these Christian denominations that are essentially end days religions. They very much are preparing for the end time. They made a big point about this in the Ruby Frankie documentary, that they've been raised from childhood to believe that the end of days is coming. And I think I got the impression from like the clips I saw of like Jimmy's father preaching that that's probably the kind of Christianity that he was exposed to. And I think
in that kind of opening scene of the first film, he lets the zombies into his church because he has, he believes his own theology and thinks that it is the end times.
Yeah.
And if you've been raised in that, if you're, somewhere between the ages of 6 and 10, and you've been raised to believe that the end of times is coming and God's faithful will be taken away, and you're left behind in this, ostensibly post-apocalyptic world, I can see how, if we think about a lot of the kind of current religious extremes of either we're already in the end times or the end times has already happened, or you know, if you think you've been left behind, you're either going to go one of two ways. And if you're that young, that's going to produce potentially something truly, truly horrifying, which
Well, and
is
yeah.
a violent man dressed as Jimmy Savile that dances like a Teletubby.
Well, and I think it's 110%. You're making an excellent point, and not to drag it into the current political moment too, but it was. I mean, these movies are turning into the zeitgeist movies.
What a time for this film to come out.
100%.
Yeah.
Because the other, so that scene, Spike leaves the barn. That scene doesn't end, but transitions after the torture by them selecting one who has not been tortured and essentially saying to him, pick one of the fingers to fight, and if you can kill them, then you'll live and you'll become a finger, too. And the person, the survivor, I guess, the one who's left over, picks one of the female Jimmys who is small and crying. And her response, she takes care of him pretty quick. Like she gets the upper hand very quickly. Yeah. And she turns and says to this person, "You picked me because you thought I was weak. You picked me because I am the smallest one here and I was crying. You picked me because you thought I was easy." And the whole thrust of this movie, and the fact that its theme is, what is the nature of evil? The nature of evil is, this person's afraid. This person is powerless. And that means that she will turn around then when she's attacked and kill you. And you can react to the fear in that way, while interspersed with all these scenes of the Jimmys and this violence is the alternative, which is, or you could react with community building and compassion and empathy. Yeah. So that contrast is there. And again, to bring it into this political moment, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this on the podcast, but you could become an agent of destruction, insert here, or you can put yourself in the line of fire, essentially, and help other people. And that may result in your death, but that is the constructive way forward. And in the background too, this is a religion or a faith that's based on fear, versus here's a religion that's based on the true meaning of sacrifice and self-sacrifice. Which one of these becomes the one that actually results in a Christ-like figure emerging?
To go back to your kind of discussion of the word charity, just because I think that it is really interesting, in that I think that what that word is doing is making us look at kind of other usages and meanings in the contemporary world, like our contemporary present moment of charity. And if we think about this as a kind of subversion of Christianity, it's a satanic cult where Sir Jimmy is worshipping his dad, who is the devil, and he's got his disciples that are following him around, and he's doing charity, but charity is actually violence. But then if we look at some contemporary Christian movements or other religious movements, Christianity, theologically, charity is there, love thy neighbor and help those in need. And, it's one of the most anti-capitalist religions that I think there is. And yet we have so many, religions or sects, to say that properly with my Essex accent, that kind of shut the door to the outsider, or they don't extend charity beyond their kind of community, or even necessarily they can be a preacher of a church and yet be engaged in violent acts. And I think actually it's part of this kind of 21st century horror turn that is making subtext textual. And I think that a lot of it hinges on that word charity. Because when he says that in the barn, the viewer and the other people in the barn, we don't know what on earth he's going to do when he says charity.
But it's not going to be good. Like, it's not good.
Yeah,
But did
what
I?
an
But did
interesting
but did we?
contemporary.
Was gonna be? Did we think that it was gonna be like skinning someone
People
alive?
being peeled like
Yeah.
grapes? No, we did
No.
not.
But I suppose it's that thing of like, there's in the kind of like late 20th, early 21st century idea of it, Christian charity has repeatedly been violence forced onto another nation or another people
Yeah.
for the benefit of generally the white Christian, like middle class
Exactly.
individuals. So things like missionary work, things like, you know, we've learned in recent years about how corrupt some of these charity organizations can be. So I think, yeah, that idea of charity being an act of violence.
We're seeing boomerang colonialism in the British
exactly.
project again, because these are such British films.
Exactly.
With the with the potential at the end, and I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, but with the potential at the end that this could expand exponentially if given like the oxygen. This could become the new religion. This could become the new colonizing force for evil.
Okay, so Mary, do you want to introduce Ray Fiennes' character and the like other side of this movie then?
So this barn scene essentially ends. A couple of the fingers are dead or injured. Spike has helped one woman who is pregnant to escape. He asks her to take him with her, and she responds.
She does not.
She does not. She reacts with fear, which I think is really sad. It's so I think it is quite obvious that he is not participating and that, you know, he's responding to her, you know, please take me away from these lunatics.
The sadism in the movie isn't just the violence. There's a lot of like emotional torture in this as well.
So she goes, and Sir Jimmy then takes the rest of his group. One of the Jimmys has scouted out what she calls a castle. So they go and they kind of look into this castle. And we are familiar with what she is describing as a castle because we've seen it in the first film, but also interspersed with what we've been watching in this film as well. We have been seeing scenes with Ray Fiennes' character, Dr. Kelson. But I think, it's just Sir Jimmy's kind of looking down and thinking, how do I work this into the narrative that I've spun to my Jimmys, my cult people? So he says, oh, this down here, it's old Nick. It's my father. He doesn't want to see you. I'll go down and I'll convince him to see you. So he goes down. But we know who it is. But we know, and Spike knows, no, this is Dr. Kelson. This is his ossuary that he has built of human bones, of zombie bones, of animal bones, where he has built these amazing towers of bones as a kind of celebration and remembrance of the dead. And also in stripping the bones down in the way that he does, it is a kind of de-individualization, like what Sir Jimmy has done, but in a very different way, in that it's like Memento Mori, being,
I was just going to say, like Memento Mori.
We're all the same, whether we're zombies or humans, we're all the same at the end. And Kathleen, I'm going to hand this over to you, but whilst all of this horror has been going on, Dr. Kelson, Ray Fiennes, has been doing his own work that I think is really fascinating. And we meet with the alpha again.
Yeah. So we don't get a whole lot of background about Ray Fiennes' character, Dr. Kelson. We get a little bit more in this. I mean, we see pictures, we see his bunker, we see his amazing LP collection of music, which does factor in. We also do see, though, a level of isolation, which again, it's a brilliantly constructed film because it takes full advantage of the language of filmmaking to really add depth to characters without making a meal out of it. We don't need to talk too much about his isolation and his loneliness, but Ray Fiennes is such a smart actor, and this is such smart directing, that you do establish very early how lonely this situation is. Of course, that comes in contrast to the cult, and it's a bit of a relief to be back with Ray Fiennes, who we're pretty sure will not be skinning anyone alive who's alive. Maybe dead, not alive. We also are, yes, reintroduced to Samson, who we saw some of their interaction in the last film, where Kelson's approach is essentially catch and release. He has access to drugs, including morphine, and he has essentially built blow darts that he uses to incapacitate the infected, and then he basically makes his grand escape by the time they come around. So it's a delicate back and forth. I feel like any description that I give is gonna undermine how complex it is. You really do have to see it, because there's not a whole lot of dialogue. It really is down to Ray Fiennes and Chi Lewis Perry, who plays Samson, who is an absolute revelation for someone who has like 2 lines and is naked for most of the movie. He gives an emotional performance that was amazing to see, because he is playing zombie, he's playing infected, and he is approaching Kelson and wanting to be drugged up, essentially. So he has figured out, in kind of a rat in a maze kind of way, that he can get the cheese if he presses the button. That if he approaches Kelson like threateningly enough, he will be shot up with this morphine, which Kelson realizes will give him a sense of peace, will give him a sense of calm. There's also an interesting kind of side moment where Samson attacks an uninfected man, so a hunter in the woods, and we see what Samson sees only for a minute, but we understand that what Samson sees, what the infected see, are other infected. So even if the person's not a threat, even if the person's not infected, what an infected person sees is a threat. And this is really important, because we've now gotten like 4 movies in, and we don't really know how the virus works. But
we just know it's a rage virus.
Yes, and the realization again is that actually where the rage comes from is fear of a threat. It's not, oh, I'm mad because I'm mad. It's I'm mad and I'm having a sustained rage emotional reaction because the entire world, because I'm basically having a psychotic break. And Kelson will eventually come to realize that no one has identified a psychological reason. People have looked at the chemical reactions, all these other areas for this regarding this virus, but no one has looked at a psychological reaction. So again, it's such good writing. It's such tight writing, because and also, the reason why the infected are the way they are, it's because they see threats everywhere and they react out of proportion and they can't calm down. So,
that's giving my military Gothic scholar brain lots of tingles.
Yes, and we have then this really charming, delicate, gentle relationship that develops, and again, there's no way I could describe it that would really do it justice. So that part, you would have to see that without the Jimmy stuff.
I would describe it as a kind of really touching, delicate dance between 2 people who don't necessarily speak the same language, but they find a way of communicating. Kelson does speak to Samson, and I think that it is clear that Samson understands some of the sounds that he's making, but it is largely, I think that's what Kelson is doing, is I think that's how he spends his time narrating his life. But there is a kind of really delicate, touching relationship that is almost like a physical dance. And I mean, at one point they do share a dance together, and it is so beautiful and magical. But it's the idea that you can communicate and find lines of communicating, even with this kind of language barrier and rage that Samson has.
So when I saw the clip of there's a little bit of a promotional clip of this going around, and I think because Ray Fiennes and the actor that plays Samson have been doing press together, I think they've been paired up for the press. And
6'9", can I just say 6'9", Chi Lewis Parry, 6'9".
That is a tall ass man.
He is.
But yeah, so what instantly came to mind when I saw that clip was Frankenstein.
Yes.
And it really reminded me of the scenes in not only the recent Frankenstein adaptation, but in the novel, where the creature has the experience, with the blind man and that educational experience and starts to become more human. And then obviously also in turn, because that scene is very Rousseauvian in nature, and as much as I fucking hate Rousseau, little weirdo, his whole thing about the pastoral and sensibility in nature, and the way to raise someone is through sensibility and emotion and sensitivity. It feels like an extension of that.
So they have a scene early on with Samson and other infected where they kill someone, and then Samson is just sat like on the floor eating this man's brains,
eating a brain.
Very much a nod to the kind of classic zombie, the brain eating kind of zombie. Once he starts having this reciprocal relationship with Kelson, and he is more and more drugged and I guess gets more used to it, then we do have a scene where he walks through the forest, he finds berries and eats them, he washes himself in the stream, he also finds himself a piece of cloth and clothes himself, because there is this kind of almost like he's becoming more and more human, and this idea of moving away from this kind of rage monster into someone who is a person not defined by their rage, which I think is exactly what you're saying. And I was thinking especially of Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, that scene where Jacob Elordi is in the forest eating berries and having those interactions. But I think that Kelson,
and he regains language. Kelson is running out of drugs at one point, and he's like, I'm gonna have to humanely euthanize this guy, because once I run out of drugs, it's all over. Like, I can't send him back to that. And the reason he decides not to do that is because Samson says moon. He identifies the moon, and it's the sweetest thing you've ever seen.
That's like the inverse of what fucking Victor does. Like, I mean, obviously these films would have been like, they're not necessarily going to be inspired by each other because they've been made too close together, but we have like Victor being like, you can't say shit, I'm gonna kick you out, and then he says that one word and he's like, now I'm even more gonna kick you out. And then a character who is a doctor, is a scientist ostensibly, who is like, oh my god, you can say moon, of course I can't euthanize you. Like,
and I mean, it is, again, in keeping with the deconstruction of religion and the creation myth. It is a creation myth. Kelson is the good Victor. He's the good God figure, I guess. And he uses this relationship to test a theory, essentially, which is that if you give the infected antipsychotics, perhaps that is maybe the cure is antipsychotics. Now, this is another one of those moments where the movie is very sadistic, not in the violence, but in terms of what happens. So, spoiler alert, again, the antipsychotics work. We don't know that they work right away. He gives them to Samson. Samson wanders off, and we don't see Samson for a bit. And some other stuff happens, but I wanted to stick to Samson. So when we come back to Samson, he's revisiting a space that we have seen in the first movie, which was an abandoned train. And he's walking up and down the train. And again, this is the most British thing. I think we have to have the most British stuff here. He sits in the train, and we get a memory of what must have happened, what happened to him during the apocalypse, which was that he was a child. And we can see in the background what's about to happen. And he's sitting on the train as a child, and then he's sitting on the train as a man, as a fully grown man. And the thing that clicks him from being Samson the infected to being Samson the resurrected human, the line that does it is his memory of being asked for a ticket by a British rail worker, and his first line as a fully fledged, returned, resurrected British man is, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have my ticket." Which, again, I burst out laughing because I was like, that is the most British thing ever.
I forgot my rail card.
Yeah. Yes, it was essentially, yeah. Oh, I forgot my rail card. The one thing that every British person knows how to say. He's attacked by other infected, and we're given to, like, it's a horrifying moment because we're like, oh no, he's fine, he's better, he's a human, he's fixed. And then he is savagely attacked by other infected, and we're like, oh my God, he's going to go back to being infected. He's being bitten 6 ways from Sunday. People are throwing up in his face like you do in these movies. It's a torturous scene because you're there like, oh God, we figured it out, and immediately it's being taken away from us again. Now later Samson emerges, and the imagery is so Christian. He emerges later from the tomb, from the cave, from the darkened entrance of the train, and he is still okay. He is still a human person, not infected. And it's this amazing moment. But of course, other stuff is happening in the background that means that while we may have a cure, we may not be able to tell anyone that we have a cure. So do you want to, like, go to this confrontation now?
Absolutely. I mean, I loved all of this film despite its violence, but this last scene with Ray Fiennes, we do kind of end a little bit with Samson kind of interspersed with that, but this last bit with Ray Fiennes is so iconic, and just,
yes,
I was like, I genuinely, my mouth was just open when I was watching it in the cinema, because I was like, it's amazing. So Sir Jimmy has gone down into this, what his childlike brain interprets as a castle, and we can tell that he actually doesn't know if the individual that he's going to meet is old Nick or not, or if this individual is his father.
So that was going to be my question, because this is always the thing with cult leaders. Are we, from the film, do we get the sense that Jimmy believes Jimmy's narrative, or do we get the sense that Jimmy knows this is constructed?
This is why I wanted to mention religious trauma, because I think that is what Jimmy has on top of the apocalypse trauma, and I think his way of interpreting this new reality, this apocalypse violent reality, is to infuse it with a religion, or like a kind of inverse religious narrative that is laden with, I'm the intermediary, I am preaching, these are my disciples, my fingers. Everything is about violence, but it is the way that he talks, the intonation, what he says. So constantly throughout the film, he will say to his fingers, "How's that?" And they will respond, "How's that?" Which is a Jimmy Saville thing, but it's also
reference.
Yes, it is a Jimmy Saville reference, but it's also in that kind of almost an empty signifier of a religion. And I think that he is so in the belief that what he's doing is what he needs to do. And I also think that there is a kind of suggestion that he may be hearing voices. And so he might be hearing voices that he is interpreting as being from his father, who he witnessed being killed or at least dragged away by the infected.
Which is then another interesting parallel to Samson, because if we are learning that antipsychotics could potentially cure the rage virus, and we've got
Yes.
non-infected villain who is potentially hearing voices, like
exactly.
you know.
I think they are meant to be paralleled in that way, and we are meant to look at Sir Jimmy Crystal and Samson as these, you know, what is the true nature of evil here.
It's an antichrist and a Christ figure for sure, and it's a antichrist of fear and violence, and it's a Christ figure who's redeemed by the compassion of, you know, and the ability to exchange empathy.
So Sir Jimmy goes down. So one of the reasons why they think that Ray Fiennes is Saint Nick, Old Nick, is because he wears iodine all over his body, which makes his body look kind of orangey red. And they also had witnessed him dancing with Samson, so, you know, dancing with demons, which is how they interpret the infected. So he goes down there and kind of, you can see he's very cautious in his interactions with the Doctor. But then eventually he's like, oh, so you're not my dad. And Kelson is like, very gently and very kindly, but he's like, no, I am not your dad. And he kind of talks to him as a doctor would.
It's an impromptu therapy session. I mean, his bedside manner is parallel to none. It's great. Yeah.
They have a nice little chat by the river, and it is almost like a therapy session. And I think that had Kelson and Jimmy Crystal spent more time together, then, you know, maybe Jimmy Crystal would have, you know, chosen to move away from his cult ways. But what he instead does is he threatens Dr. Kelson, and he says, please pretend to be Old Nick. I'm going to bring my peeps down. That's an actual quote. And you're going to pretend to be the devil, and if not, I'm going to pull out your insides and gut you. So Kelson is like, okay, well, that sounds like a threat, because it is. I still don't really understand why he goes along with this, but maybe it's because he's been living such an isolated life that it's just something to do.
And I think there is a moment in there. I don't know if he's talking to Samson or if he's talking to himself, but he says, I was afraid. You know, he's like, I don't really know why I'm doing this, and I'm at the end. He talks about almost being at the end of his life anyway, of, you know, I've done my work. I've done everything I was supposed to do. I knew eventually I was going to die. It didn't really bother me, but now confronted with this evil, I am afraid. And what he does next, I think, is so interesting, because it's almost like a folk horror.
It's honest, like, it's
mishmash.
So... I love the concept of the Bone Temple, and I love the ossuary and the memento mori that Ray Fiennes has built, and what it means. And then what he does is he takes that up to 11. He dresses what is already a very Gothic infused set, with candles and speakers, and he dresses himself up, and he brings out from his amazing vinyl collection an Iron Maiden record. He also
Number of the Beast.
The Number of the Beast. He gets smoke out, and I think he also infuses like psychedelics into the atmosphere.
Yes.
So
he blows the smoke into their faces, which does make them trip a bit.
So when the Jimmies come down, they come down at night. They're in this kind of bone castle. Everything's illumined by candlelight, and then they're hearing the sound of speakers, and Iron Maiden's song plays out almost in its entirety. And Kelson just runs around, jumps on tables, and lip syncs to the song "The Number of the Beast."
So he's basically like performing an 80s idea of Satanism to children that have no pop culture knowledge whatsoever.
No, none.
Yes. And then Sir Jimmy and Kelson as Saint Old Nick, they have a kind of conversation where he says, yes, this is what we have agreed, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to multiply your fists so that you have many fists. So essentially, while before...
So this could be the new religion.
Yeah. So where now you are limited to 7 fingers for your fist, I want you to have multiple fists. So lots of sevens.
So he's kind of like, I don't love this, but maybe I can at least stop you from killing so many people.
Well, I think he's just going along with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
until
Go forth and multiply is a pretty
It's
classic.
well, it's one of those, I think, interesting things too, where a religion could start off positive and slip very quickly into negative if it's given permission to do so. It's a really interesting, I think, moral spot to put Kelson in, because he's this very generally positive, good father figure, and what he's being asked to do and what he does is essentially give permission to expand the cult, to continue to enact violence and potentially make this a nationwide cult. And the only thing that saves him is that he recognizes Spike.
He recognizes Spike, and just as he's about to let them all go off with their new kind of belief and fear in Sir Jimmy Crystal, he recognizes Spike, takes off his mask, and then realizes that Spike has been taken into this violent, horrific, sadistic cult, and clearly does not want to be there. So then he adds one more thing that was not pre-discussed with Sir Jimmy, and he says, "You are my son. And as my son, you know that you need to be crucified." And he calls on the fingers to crucify Sir Jimmy. And there's a little
Which
bit of
they
a
are
kind of
surprisingly willing to do, as
they're
it turns
so
out.
willing to do, because it fits with everything that he said about religion and old Nick and what he's railing against, i.e. God.
And also there's skepticism of him, because at least one of the fingers, at least one, had said, I believe that this guy's old Nick, because look at him. Look at Number of the Beast, great. But doesn't it seem sometimes like Jimmy Crystal is not telling us the truth? So they are willing. I think it was a really good depiction of a cult, because I think sometimes depictions of cults give cult leaders too much power and too much sympathy, and we forget that it is actually a really fragile structure when you get down to it. Yes, it's based in fear. Yes, it can have a massive, devastating psychological effect, but it is fragile. It all depends on this one figure keeping it together.
And often cult leaders have multiple, like, if you think about like the Rajneeshis, if you think about Scientology, like there is one person, but there's usually then 3 or 4 enforcers, propagandists. Look at the Nazi Party, like to be a big sustained cult that's not going to get eaten alive by ego, you do need to have people enforcing the cult leader, who often don't actually believe the cult leader, but believe in the power that the cult leader has over the people. So sustain the fallacy, essentially.
Yes. It all explodes into violence. I mean, Jimmy does have a knife. He does lash out. Kelson is mortally wounded. Jimmy receives a wound to his side, and I think the real emotionally resonating thing is Spike. So we're down to one cult member who has betrayed. Kelly is her actual name. Kelly, who I'm sure will come up in the next movie, because she survives this. So we've got Kelly, the one remaining cult member. Jimmy's down for the count, and there's a great emotional scene between Spike and Kelson, where Spike essentially says, "You saved me. You could have just let me go, and you would have been okay." And Kelson's like, "No, I couldn't have done that." It was such. You wouldn't think, again, for a zombie movie, that you would have this much emotional resonance, and it would be, but that is the basis for all of the 28 Days Later movies, really, is that when it comes down to it, you're stronger together than you are apart. Compassion, empathy, that's how you survive. It was true in the first movie with that found family. It's true in these later movies, and as sadistic as this film could be, the ultimate message of it is that self-sacrifice saves you. And Kelson does die. Samson returns, and tells Kelson, thank you. He emerges from the tomb, emerges from the train, still all right. He's been cured. The downside is, of course, Kelson, who understands that antipsychotics would be a cure for the illness, he dies without really being able to communicate that to everyone. So on one hand, we have Zombie Christ, who has emerged as a kind of third thing, not quite human, but not quite infected, this resurrected being. On the other hand, it's another gut punch for the audience that we found a cure. And because of this last act of an extraordinarily evil man and his evil cult, no one's going to know how to fix it now.
Surely, though, if Dr. Kelson is a good NHS-trained doctor, that man's keeping notes.
He did make an NHS joke, by the way, earlier, which we gloss over, which is he makes a joke about...
Do you know what? I actually made a note of this line because it was really funny. It's when he's talking to Samson and just like having a kind of one-sided conversation about how he's given him peace, and he says, "So you owe me." Only kidding. I'm NHS free of charge.
I mean,
which only works in a British horror film.
Yes, it does. I would hope that he has written down a prescription. He's got his little Lloyd George.
Fingers
and he's written
crossed.
Down.
Fingers crossed.
What this is really, really strongly reminding me of, particularly because in the first film, you guys mentioned that one of the infected, which is where we meet Samson, has a baby, and it's sort of implied
yes,
that perhaps the baby is not infected.
The baby isn't infected.
No, the baby isn't. Yeah,
no, it isn't, definitely. It's really, really reminding me of Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake series, the Mad Adam trilogy. Because at the end, spoilers for Mad Adam if you've not read them, I would highly recommend them. I wrote a chapter about them for Kathleen and Mary, actually. But where that ends is basically that you have these, generated sort of uber humans, I suppose, and then you have the survivors, and the survivors and the humans find a way to live together, and the humans pass on knowledge to the Crakers, the kind of engineered people, and the Craker who is recording the history accidentally makes pop culture and kind of like previous cultural references into religion, because they say things to him and he obviously interprets them, because they sort of they're telling the story from Oryx, and it's this religion, but also that idea that there is hope for survival even in the apocalypse when we come together. And that, God, it feels really intense to say this after the last week of news, but that idea that survival at the cost of such horrendous violence versus sacrifice for the potential good of the many is kind of you can't justify survival when it's so horrendous and so violent, and that path of violence, even if it started out in the name of survival, can take you to a very sadistic, very cruel, very horrendous, inhuman place, essentially.
Well, let me tell you how this movie ended for me. So I've come off of a very long couple weeks. I have family in Minnesota, in St. Paul, and it has been a terrifying experience, obviously, but it has also been shockingly a hopeful experience, because I have never seen a community, a whole state of diversity, and just it's been amazing because they've all come together and everyone is supporting each other. And I've had to reevaluate very strongly an American identity in the last several years. And it's rare that I see something that confirms the best of us. But the last couple weeks has been not just the best of everything that America could be, but also the best of everything that people could be. Not in, obviously, the oppression and the violence, but in the response to it. So I went and saw this film, again, the unfortunate zeitgeist of my life. And the last scene, Spike and Kelly escape, and the last scene is the return of Jim. It's the return of Jim from the first 28 Days Later film, as well as his daughter. And without, I won't go into the details of the scene, but essentially they hear a commotion outside. They go out to see what's going on, and it is Spike and Kelly fleeing zombies, and Jim and his daughter at a distance watching that happen. And the daughter turns to Jim and says, "We're going to help them, aren't we?" And he turns to her and says, "Of course we are." And then I burst into tears in the theater because that was the culminating moment of me sitting in there on a Tuesday afternoon after having again lived through and is continuing to live through this entire experience, and seeing some of the worst, but also seeing the "of course we are."
Yeah.
And the film ends on that note, again with the music from the first film, that haunting score, and just knowing that is at the core of all of these movies. They're all very different. They all have very different styles. They all have very different structures, but yeah, it was lucky I was pretty much the only one in that theater, because
Yeah.
I was not in a good emotional, I mean, I was in a great emotional place, but I was in a very raw emotional place, and
that is
these
something-
movies have done that to me, especially these last two have really done that to me.
That's something that Nia DaCosta in particular is really, really good at doing. Like, even some of her like less well regarded work, like The Marvels isn't a great movie, but it is a great movie. Like, the heart of the movie and the intention of the movie is beautiful, and I think she's really good at kind of like balancing violence and action and comedy, but never really fully losing the sight of it. And I think there's obviously, there's a lot that she brings to that. But I suppose especially to have Cillian Murphy's character, who is that symbol of hope in the first one, that like, he has this found family and they're going to try and survive, and they're choosing community over individualistic violence. Like, having him come back, it's like the end of Empire Strikes Back, where, Luke and Leia are stood there and they're like, "We're going to defeat the evil Empire and we're going to get Han Solo back. Don't worry." Like, it's
never so low. You're never so far at your lowest that there isn't that modicum of hope in it. The Empire Strikes Back, you're right, it's the most depressing of the movies. And this is a movie about evil.
Yeah.
Not even an hour earlier, I was watching someone get taken apart in a barn. And I still left that movie. It's like with the first 28 Years Later. I went in there to see zombies. I came out completely emotionally changed as a person from this amazing grief journey. Here,
like, how were you radicalized? Zombie movie.
Yes, I saw someone getting peeled like a grape, and then I still end it thinking we're going to be okay, because people are designed to help each other more than they are designed to hurt each other.
Yeah,
I
that
think
was
that's
beautiful, Kathleen.
I was just going to say, I think that's actually a really beautiful place to end this review. In the, obviously,
go see this film unless you're Lauren, and
I mean,
we need to make
tell you about it.
We need to make you a super cut version of just the Samson Kelson stuff.
I think TikTok will probably give it to me, because that's what happened with the last one. The bits that were safe to put on TikTok that weren't going to get taken down. Although TikTok is very glitchy at the moment, and I'm sure it's the thing to do with anybody making.
No,
all of
which
the
is based in
snow.
nothing, and we have no reason to think any otherwise.
But yeah, usually I can rely on my algorithm to serve me the parts of horror films I can actually watch.
Well, if there aren't 5 million TikTok edits just of Ray Fiennes dancing to Number of the Beast, then truly the entire app is dead, and we should just delete it.
Someone said that he also listens to Duran Duran.
Yes.
That's basically, he listens to Duran Duran, he listens to more Duran Duran, he listens to even more Duran Duran, and then when he's asked to be the devil, he puts on Iron Maiden, which I think is just really funny.
He is the last
Duran, like a wolf.
No, he is the last Duran Duran fan in all of in the post-apocalypse.
But that's
here.
So British as well. That like, yes. What is this like potential savior listening to in the apocalypse?
Duran Duran.
My mum and dad got married to Duran Duran.
It's hungry like the wolf, yeah.
But yeah, I think, as we have said, if you've made it to the end, then thank you, and obviously please do let us know what you think. But I think what we, myself and Kathleen, who have seen the film, and Lauren, who has vicariously seen it through our discussion, we would agree that if you can watch this film, it's 100% worth seeing. It is such a kind of intense roller coaster of watching some of the most horrifying scenes that you will see in a horror film. Yes, you will see someone crucified and left upside down to die, but you will also see really incredibly magical and beautiful moments, mainly about Samson, but also the ending of hope. And I think, Kathleen, obviously we love you so much, and watching everything that's happening from afar, like as much as it's difficult for us, it's like 1,000 times more difficult for you. But I think that is such an important message, that even small acts of solidarity and community can resonate and have ripple effects. And it is such a beautiful thing to see people showing empathy and kindness and solidarity.
Yeah, and even just, I'll say this, thank you, because even just talking about these kind of cultural things, this is how you process it. So that kind of shared experience is amazing. And yes, it's a 10 out of 10 from us.
Yeah.
This movie, hooray for Duran Duran. And
we know this much is true.
We know this much is true.
And on that note, stay safe and stay spooky, y'all.
Stay safe and stay spooky.
Stay safe and stay spooky. Bye.